Welcome, everybody. I'm happy to be here and to speak about a particular case study, that of Senegal, where modernity has been integrated into the vision in a moment of independence and growth and passages in Senegal, a place that has been influenced by France. So I have a synthesis of photos here, a selection that I have chosen
entre 2011 et avant-hier, dans les deux quartiers, ou plutôt dans deux ensembles des quartiers,
in a series of
d'intervention
suburbs
programmées par l'État via deux sociétés immobilières, à savoir donc la SICAP, la société immobilière du Cap-Vert, et qui a été créée en 1950.
Real estate series, one here built in 1950s, and
donc la Société nationale d'habitation à loyer modéré,
the low-cost
au HLM,
property,
1991, créé en 1960,
which was created in 1960, at the time of the independence of Senegal. So these somewhat long titles seem to sum up some of the current concerns of the inhabitants of the Cap-Vert Peninsula, but also the concerns of the residents of this district. They are something of a product themselves of this Senegalese vision of modernity, the idea of creating a new Dakar. And the first inhabitants of these neighborhoods remained owners of their properties, even after they moved in subsequently. So when they first settled there, they opposed this new way of living, and it ran counter to their habits. But they're happy. They're still happy to live there. They're still proud. They're proud to be children of the HLM, the low-cost property. But they're also part of a privileged class, because it was the class that was the class of the civil servants. In the brochures of the SICAP that produced these low-cost inhabitants, we find that they were middle class, lower and middle class, and there was a distinction made between the apartments and the villas built by the SICAP, which were aimed at a higher class, either middle class or the upper middle class. Civil servants recently settled in Dakar, with the shift of the capital, the move of the capital. And then the HLM, the apartment blocks, which were also aimed at particular categories of people, rarely shopkeepers, even though the procedures for accessing this kind of apartment changed. So the title between land pressure and multiplication of land real estate projects driven by the state and its private partners, and we've also seen this on the plateau of Dakar, this land pressure which is resulting in the massive demolition even of the listed heritage listed under the 2005 law of historic monuments in Dakar. And this real estate project, which is frankly lacks transparency, which is driven by the government and by partners who we find gradually from the posters, but the projects are much more visible. You can see much more on YouTube, in fact, because it would be worthwhile doing some research on the web to look at these models of cities that are proposed with a series of tower blocks replacing the 1940s and 1950s villas. And this modernity has been modified by the inhabitants, and we're going to see 3 case studies by the SICAP and 3 case studies with HLM, which is the company that does social housing. But I think it's important to look very quickly. I'll show you a series of maps to situate the study zone, the area we will be looking at in geographical terms. So this is a map by Pinet-Laprade, 1862. You can see the sort of checkerboard, which is starting to emerge, the octagonal checkerboard. And the city is gradually taking shape. And I say nothing is shown for this part, which I can't see, which will be studied in this Senegal project for the new Dakar. This is a map produced by the Institute of National Geography, which indicates which roads can be used on the peninsula, which are usable roads. Their roads are made of rock. They can be covered by buses, I think. So when we do a close-up on the part we're concerned that we're interested in, you can see where the laser is pointing. And you can see where the laser is pointing there. And the land front line, which was built by the French to defend against outside attacks. It ends at the Jardin d'Essai, which is the current park. Sorry, I have to show it in landscape mode so it fits in the PowerPoint. This is a map from 1939 where we can clearly see. There you've got the checkerboard of the plateau. And then you can see the part that's still under construction, but already defined by 1914. The construction of the native city, the indigenous city, which with the kind of barrier separating from the natives and the French colonists. So here we see in 1942, you can see the 2 towns very clearly on the plateau. The plateau for the French. And there you've got the protective space, the buffer space, and then the colonial area.
Très peu est dit, d'ailleurs on ne rentre pas complètement dans la carte.
It doesn't quite fit on the map. Very little said about this area, which is a marshy, boggy zone. It's marshy area with a great deal of vegetation.
On arrive au plan de 1951.
So then we get the 1951 plan.
Ce plan définit pour la première fois.
For the first time, this plan defines
ces zones d'habitation économique.
This economic living area, the orange part.
En voyant de près, c'est marqué habitation économique. Et puis cet axe.
And then this axis.
Cet axe-là.
The axis there, where the laser is pointing.
Dit rue des Puits.
It's called the rue des Puits, which will become Avenue Bourguiba. And then the Sengoria project around this roundabout, with all around it a series of blocks or bars, which would then be presented in a brochure, which I'll show you later on. Here, for a more accurate location,
les deux quartiers,
we can see the two districts, the two neighborhoods, in which I looked at particularly closely. So SICAP Erudis, which is the first estate built by the Société Immobilière du Cap-Vert, SICAP. And then the second estate, Rue des Puits. And then here, where the laser is pointing, which I can't see myself, this area.
Qui sera, à partir de 1960,
which from 1960,
le quartier HLM,
which would become the HLM, the different company district.
Donc 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
so the gradual numbering of the districts from 1 to 6, which would replace and absorb what had become slum living spaces, which were villages which had the name Mauritanian city, which had references to the fact, and it's still true, that many people would travel to Mauritania to go to the British schools in Mauritania. So you can see this Ouagouniaï, this district, one of the first built with a prototype housing a prototype district, where the first higher technicians worked on HLMs, where they settled first to test the type of housing habitat offered to the inhabitants. So we come back to SICAP.
D'abord, une petite précision.
First, I'd like to specify something about why this type of housing was a novelty. Because they bought an apartment in a building or a villa when one's home was in the public mind was first, the process of acquiring a home was first to acquire land, then to begin building a house that could be converted and that would become larger over the years, and depending on financial resources, and which also depend on the increase in the number of people in the household. So these extensions were, of course, possible in villa-type housing, but apartments, on the other hand, that kind of expansion was much more difficult. So this meant that the hire purchase system, rental purchase system, was chosen by the majority of the people, which enabled them to become owners after 20 years or so. So a kind of mortgage system. So here you can see the first estate on your left, which is called the Rue 10. Rue 10, Street 10. It was named after the street, which is now Rue Galliop. And then the Rue de Poix, which became Avenue Bourguiba. That's on the top right. Which was a street that led to the puits, the well, in English. Okay, so you see on the photos, this is just after the opening of this very low-cost housing. They call it très économique, which means very low cost. As you can see, in fact, I've just discovered the project which replaces it, because these houses were destroyed just 3 months ago. So this is an overview of these houses. And as you can see, there are blocks and shared services, shared units with kitchens, showers, and there were some shared toilets, particularly for the studio apartments. And here's the second housing estate. And here is the presentation of in the 1962 brochure of the new program called Liberté, Freedom, Liberté.
de l'ouvrage.
And the title of the brochure.
De Senghor. Alors, dans un congrès à Thiès,
in a conference in 1962, it was said that improving housing represents an effort for civilization.
Et d'objets d'art. On y prend goût à la culture des arbres et des fleurs. On y crée une nouvelle civilisation nègre-africaine.
By creating housing, we encourage people to buy fewer frivolities, and we develop civilization. So it presents the plan for the 128 units with shops on the ground floor, which are placed around about. And there's going to be a fountain in the middle, which we can't see. A new district near Dakar. And one of the specific things about the SICAP was that it developed empty land, almost empty land. HLM, on the other hand, tended to reabsorb existing fabric. So this is in a wide, clear, aerated and well-planted area. Very low rent, and villas which can be where people can gradually become owners of. So there's a whole lot of images which presents all the public amenities, green spaces, for children's playgrounds, and as you can see, this is the only example in Dakar until recent years of real block housing. This is not typical of Dakar. In fact, social housing in the ideas of the 1950s to 1980s was a sort of a halfway stage between villas, detached housing, and something that was more like Western-style housing, so-called Western-style housing, with several floors. So here you can see a model, a high-prestige villa, and below the fountain, as you can see, where you can imagine people walking around in the evenings. A whole lifestyle proposed with these developments. Here are some green spaces, which are now occupied by recently built blocks. Another brochure in 1996, proposed in Istanbul by the SICAP. So we come back to the 3 case studies. What's left? The first housing estates built in 1951. You can see these strip buildings, where you have the buildings which generally, the windows which generally go into the 2 or 3 into lounges, 2 or 3 rooms. So when you go into the courtyard of one of these houses, you can see the entry, the front door. The houses were built with these walls. They're like compounds. In fact, they've been added by the inhabitants. This courtyard, which was initially made of sand, and then slabs were laid down. But when there was sand there, people could, the inhabitants would plant trees, and they've retained some of their vegetation. As you can see on the wall there, the part that's been added. This is the veranda, which was entirely shut in. And then there's another block, which you can just about glimpse behind there, which was added. There's an additional room with a built-in bathroom, ensuite bathroom. So you go into the courtyard at the back, as you can see here. So what was the veranda has been completely closed in to make a room. And here's the interior.
Donc avec ces salons qui étaient initialement
So with the lounge or sitting room,
en général,
which was
dans tous les appartements carrelés.
Previously made of cement, but in almost all the apartments has been tiled. And then the addition of a window, and then the second part, which is closed in, which was the former veranda. And the 2 bedrooms. So we go out again, and here we go into another plot of the same kind, which is 2 bedroom. Where you can see at the end of the alleyway this 2-story block which was added to generate income for the people who inherited the apartment. Because most of the people to whom these apartments were assigned have left or died, and have left their apartments to their children. Generally speaking, that's the system. So once they get past the first 15 years, they start the first conversion. First, they work on the original apartment, in general by completely closing in the veranda to make a second room, a second reception room, where visitors could wait. And generally, they've closed in the open spaces to create a new room, or to create a new room, or to build a new bathroom. The kitchen generally remains the same, as I noticed in these specific cases. But generally speaking, it's kept for storing food, because people tend to cook outside. And then people add either an extra room for somebody who's joined the household, or they rent rooms out. So it becomes a 2-floor block with 2 entries. The first ground floor apartment, which is there, and another, and then behind there's a staircase to the first floor apartment.
Donc, vous voyez mieux ici, donc cette
you can see better here.
Qui est encore appelée veranda.
The veranda, which is still called the veranda.
Une veranda complètement fermée. Vous voyez,
it's completely closed in.
Plus vite, continue.
Sorry, I need to go a bit quicker. So here you can see how floors have been added. Generally, first or second floor. Third example, Chinabi, with several conversions still underway over the last 15 years, with a staircase to access the first floor apartment, then demolished because it didn't leave room for guests. So in the back courtyard, a staircase that leads to the new space, the new area. On the first floor for part of the family that comes to visit regularly on vacation. So decided to add a floor. So here we have what is called the women's courtyard for women and children, and the entrance, a lounge, a sitting area for the men, who meet every day in the early evening and at weekends to have a chat. So you can see a lot of seats added. So HLM, the second company, second case study, you can see this test, the variations of different kinds of building and different kinds of apartment building and house. This is 1960 to 1966. This is the original plan, which I found in the archives of HLM.
Je passe vite.
I'll go quickly
Donc,
through.
Prototype,
So this prototype operation, which was home for the technicians who were working on designing the HLM, that was like a pilot that they carried out. And here are a series of drawings. I found hundreds, not all of them, but they're not quite filed properly. So you'll have a fairly good idea of the changes that have been made when you look at the photos. For example, this the facades, you'll see them this afternoon. This is the main facade of a villa, a prestige villa, a 4-bedroom. And therefore more strip housing here, which you'll also see same model as before, and with a wall added and tiled in front. And more strip housing from the 1970s. And this facade that we still find quite frequently in HLM 5. With the remains of what was the original twin housing structure. Semi-detached, we would call it in English. And all these open spaces, which people fight very hard to keep, and so they use whatever resource they can. Here, a kind of fence of tires, in order to prevent the municipality from taking over their space. So they build a sort of perimeter with plants and flowers. There are 3 examples very quickly that I want to show you. Are the apartment buildings like this? Why claustra? In the model of tropical architecture, this was sort of constructed by these claustra, this way of both seeing and not seeing the outside, creating shade, which are regularly blocked in, quite frequently blocked in by the inhabitants. Except they've remained in the stairways, and then grills over the windows. The first apartment belongs to this actress, who completely changed the apartment. She said because she lived in the US and she wanted to open it up, so she knocked down the wall to make an open living space in the American style with a kitchen. The kitchen, which hasn't been changed, she's knocked down a wall with a kind of washing room, and it's remained a washing room. A new window's been opened up because some of the claustra, parts of them have been blocked in. And the bathroom, she wants to make it look better, so she's added tiling. Likewise, tiling in the bedroom on the wall. So they've changed the decor, and so outside. So this is regularly used by for shops. It's been left free, so some apartments. Les habitants et même propriétaires des étages, ou servent de stockage pour which people open shops or use the storage spaces for the nearby market. So here from the outside, the apartment you saw, you've just seen the inside. So this is on the top floor, is the apartment we've just seen the inside of. So the veranda, loggia, or maybe a balcony we call it, it's closed in loggia. People walking through the district, you can still walk through the open ground floor galleries. So this person in a fairly striking remark. Before there were car parks, public lighting everywhere, gardens, and playing space for the children. It was the ultimate in modernity. Senghor housed in the building next to ours the dancers of the Moulder Africa dancing company funded by Bisserier and Germain. There were all these artists who came from everywhere. Many artists for all. There's a prestige of President Senghor. So he involved all the people from the cultural community who were housed freely in these apartments. So here next door we see villas. You can see the same type of facade on the left, with an extension of the courtyard with this new wall, which corresponds to the alignment that the inhabitants of the street granted themselves to reduce the width of the street. So that was the original wall, and then this slab with an outdoor kitchen on the ground floor. So I'll go quickly through. So now we go into another part of HLM 5. So there are open-air parties regularly at weekends. It's the only parking space, but can also be used for ceremonies. And this is called Rue de Pinch, this traditional square.
HLM qui ne sont pas habités par des lébous. Et on rentre alors dans le quartier pour voir.
So now we're going to the neighborhood to see the final example.
Une maison qui avait tenu, résisté.
A house which has survived since 1974 when it was built. It's remained exactly the same, it hasn't been changed. Just with the change of the outside. So we could go into the street, we can see the alignment is no longer maintained. Everybody's built a wall, and there's just a pedestrian space, no room for cars any longer.
Et voilà, des photos donc de 2011.
And here's some photos of 2011. This house that's remained almost unchanged, with a picture from the 1980s with children in front of the entrance. Before the wall was put up, and now the wall with a public bench, which has been built into the courtyard. And they built this room, additional room.
Et puis, je suis arrivée avec une semaine de retard.
I came a week late. I arrived a week late. The house had been demolished 2 weeks before in order to build 3 floors. So that's the debris of demolition.
Et puis, une vidéo, donc,
and then we have an overview which shows you all the public spaces which have been occupied, particularly this public garden which has become the mosque. And then to finish, the goats, the sheep, still remain in this mode of living, either in apartments or on terraces that have been built as the third floor has been built on a roof terrace. So now you can see on the left there is a kitchen, and on the right there is a little enclosure for the sheep and goats.
Merci.
Alors, je me suis permis de
So I've taken the liberty of putting my own photo up there because I want to show the photo of young Chen. I've been working with young Chen since the beginning of this century, who came here to France as part of the presidential plan as an urbanist. He qualified as an architect in Nantes. He remained interested in urban studies And in particular in the social side, doing his doctorate at the UHSSS on the amazing new cities or workers' cities that were built in the 1950s in China. So Young Chen wrote his thesis on a very original subject because he took up every possible position. He illegally rented an apartment for a summer. He worked alongside on the residence committee. He worked in the Bureau of Urban Planning, and he goes back regularly to see what changes have taken place in these spaces. On Sunday, he learned that he hadn't had permission from the university to travel, which is a pity because he'd also come for the double master's degree that's between Tongji and Strasbourg and Paris universities. And a week ago, we were talking, just a week ago, we were talking about this presentation. So that is why
je vous propose d'imaginer qu'il est à côté de moi. Maintenant, vous voyez, et que nous parlons à deux voix. Donc, Chaoyang, c'est pour ma part un lieu que j'ai commencé à étudier moi aussi pendant ma thèse, qui était consacré à la ville de Shanghai et où je cherchais à comprendre
which was on the city of Shanghai, and I was trying to understand the housing dynamics there in the 1950s.
C'est un an après la libération, pour reprendre la terminologie
was 1 year after the liberation, and the purpose of liberation in the new communism was to imagine what new kind of city would be put in place for this new society which was under construction. That was my first part, with the standardization that developed in parallel, which would take very different form in the course of the 1950s. The second main part will be on the profound change at the end of the 20th century, which would take the form of transformation in housing, at the point when housing became a commercial product. What will happen? So the question is, what's happening? Where have we got to? Given that in the last few years, one of the buildings has become a national heritage asset.
Revenons au début.
Let's go back to the beginning.
On est là sur des fonds de cartes. Je suis très flattée parce que c'est Yang Chen qui les utilise.
It is Yang Chen who uses these maps because it's Yang Chen who uses them, but I drew them.
Comme l'expliquait tout à l'heure sur Tashkent, une époque où les plans étaient impossibles à trouver.
It's impossible to find maps and drawings that go back to the 1950s. So we had to develop our own plans, our own drawings.
En périphérie
so here on
de ce Shanghai qui est baigné
periphery
par une
of
rivière
Shanghai,
de
which
500 mètres de large, le Huangpu,
has a river 50 meters wide running through it, 500 meters wide.
Qui est un peu plus modeste, seulement 50 à 70 mètres. Et
then
on
the river
est dans
gets
cette
a bit
ville
narrower,
donc, qui est urbanisée à l'intérieur de cette voie ferrée.
And then we come to the city, which was locked inside the railway lines until the 1950s, and with all the industries based along the water. So when the Chinese government,
le Parti communiste prend le pouvoir, il s'agit
the communist power took power, the aim was to find housing for 2 or 3 million people who were either inhabitants, workers,
les fameux 100 pans le long du fleuve, soit dans des baraques
who were housed along the river, or sort of they were living in kind of cardboard housing. We had no photographs because we weren't allowed to nobody did any photographing in front of cardboard houses in the 1930s, 1940s and 50s. So the aim was to build these new cities alongside the industrial infrastructure. It's a very ambitious project because, as you can see, in everything that was built until 1950, until 1978,
Et Yang Chen a essentiellement consacré sa thèse à C1, 1950. On va aller voir un petit peu plus d'un peu plus près ce qu'il en est. Mais vous avez de facto l'ensemble du territoire qui est présenté. Ce territoire, il est choisi en dehors de la ville, n'est pas pour autant des champs. On est sur un terrain qui est très densément peuplé et cultivé, mais qui est choisi donc pour sa proximité d'un cours d'eau, ça peut être assez agréable, et puis parce qu'il peut être facilement développé pour cette ville nouvelle à laquelle on aspire. Alors voici des documents d'archives, des documents d'époque. Cette ville nouvelle, je reprends là l'intitulé qu'il y a ici en chinois, Xincun, Cité nouvelle, homme nouveau. Il s'agit bien d'imaginer quelle va être cette vie dans laquelle l'ouvrier est la personne majeure et la plus importante de la société. Ces photos sont celles d'inauguration, donc l'inauguration des appartements qui sont destinés d'abord aux apartments intended for model workers d'excellence au sein de l'entreprise. Et puis vous voyez là tout ce qui est destiné à la propagande. On affiche le portrait de Mao à
workplaces. So here we saw they're putting up a portrait of Mao on the walls with this new furniture, and we've got plants recently placed, though the site was still under construction. And on the new images here, the idea was to provide a happy living conditions for children,
de ce que l'on attend de cette construction de la ville nouvelle.
To show what was expected of the new city.
Jean Brunoff nous a déjà dit
so everything as Jean Brunoff said about
cette ville que le roi Babar a construite dans les années 30.
Chaque maison built in the 1930s. Every house must have the same color and sunlight exposure.
Le palais des loisirs et le palais du travail.
Palace of leisure and the palace of work, as you'll see on the next image.
Donc maintenant qu'on est sur l'image suivante,
voilà,
le palais de la culture, n'est-ce pas, qui vient encadrer avec les équipements publics,
which fits in with the public amenities.
Alors comment ça se passe?
As a kind of frame for the new housing. So what happens? This is China's first period of prosperity, the installation of the first 5-year plan, which didn't really last 5 years, but it doesn't matter, it's still a 5-year plan. And where the aim was essentially to define standards for the rapid construction of new districts. 1950s, things were still quite honest. Chaoyang is the first workers' city.
Et on a une superficie moyenne par famille qui est de 30 mètres carrés, avec un taux de construction de 74 mètres carrés. Mais bien évidemment, dans cette société nouvelle, on est encore loin de pouvoir mettre en place le confort pour tous.
But obviously in this new society, general comfort was hard to provide. So there were shared kitchens and shared bathrooms.
C'est une situation qui est pas nouvelle.
It's a situation that's not new.
Donc les toilettes elles font partie du domaine privatif.
But toilets on the other hand were not shared.
On organise également au cœur de la cité, tout ce qui relève des équipements collectifs, on est là dans l'héritage déjà d'une ville nouvelle telle qu'elle a été pensée à Shanghai sous le gouvernement nationaliste 20 ans auparavant.
We see put in place something that was already considered under the nationalist government 20 years before.
Les écoles, la poste,
so where the city is built, the estate is built around the school, the post office, the municipal centre. So again, what we've seen at Tashkent, they had the same radius of 500 meters, the amenities available to families, amenities available for the larger communities. So the Soviet influence is there. And that Soviet influence would continue with the critiques that we still find in the archives. And that was part of the work done by Chen. And they were Soviet and Polish architects who were invited in the 1950s, and they criticized this approach. And what they said was they were only a kilometer from the city center.
Et on est loin de tout, on est loin des commerces, on est loin des équipements. Donc
you're a long way from shops, you're a long way from
de créer une ville morceau de ville.
From amenities, so it's going to cost you an awful lot to create a fragment of city along so far from the centre.
1002 foyers pour cette
A fragment of city because they already had 1,200 households as the target.
Encore dans la politique de l'enfant unique, ça va venir 20 ans plus tard,
the single child policy had not yet begun
imaginez qu'on est plutôt à 4, 5, 6 enfants par famille.
So there are 4, 5, 6 children per family.
Cette première cité va comprendre 6 à 7 000 personnes.
Estate would have 6 or 7,000 people.
On est
And when the new ones were built,
petite ville, dans une ville moyenne à l'échelle française.
So in French terms, you'd have a medium-sized town of 50 to 60,000 people.
Vont devenir ces logements?
What would become of these households, of these houses, these dwellings? Before asking this question,
avant de se poser cette question, je vous présente un peu plus
I'd like to present you the different typologies.
Drastique baisse aussi bien en termes
You'll see
d'investissement
the
constructif
terrific
qu'en termes de superficie par foyer.
fall in
qui est fait.
investment and in
Ce qui
size.
était présenté dans la thèse de Yang Chen. Pour ceux qui veulent la voir, sachez que
This was presented in Yang Chen's thesis. You can get it from the school.
Et voilà les différents types. Ceux de
From the cité here.
1952,
So here are the
je
different
dirais d'une
types.
certaine manière, sont
1952.
privilégiés parce que on a encore une certaine convivialité qui est organisée,
There's a certain sociability,
une qualité
a certain
de l'environnement,
quality
mais aussi des
of the
matériaux.
environment and of
C'est
materials.
vraiment conçu, je dirais, dans cette logique de la ville moderne des années 30 et
The
des
idea
années
was
50.
really
En
to
revanche,
pursue the
quand
dynamic
commencent
of
les
the
autres plans
new
quinquennaux,
towns of the
il s'agit
1920s
au
and 30s.
contraire de
But when we
construire
look at the new
vite
5-year
des
plans, the aim was to
impératifs
build
quantifiés d'un
quickly.
système communiste, vous connaissez, je ne vous décris pas plus, et
The
puis,
quantified
bien
system
évidemment,
under
d'arriver à
the
toujours baisser les coûts de construction.
communist system. And of course, at
Donc,
the
on est
same
passé
time, the aim
d'une
was to
norme
reduce
qui est une
construction
norme
costs.
pour cet homme nouveau et cette civilisation nouvelle.
And what we
à
see
une
is the
norme.
standards,
On
there was
garde
a
le même
shift
vocabulaire, mais attention,
in
on
the
change
standards for the new
complètement
man.
de mode de pensée,
We
qui est là
shift
uniquement
to a
pour
complete
résoudre des coûts de construction dans le
shift to
cadre d'une
standards
économie qui n'a pas les
based on the
moyens de
idea
ses
of
ambitions.
reducing
Alors, elle n'a pas les moyens de ses
construction
ambitions à
costs
Shanghai, je ne vous fais pas le détail,
because we
mais
are
en
in a
gros,
country
plus
that
de
does not have the
90%
resources to
des
meet
recettes
its
de la ville
ambitions.
passaient à Pékin. Et par contre,
Because
elle
in
a un
Shanghai, we're in a
objectif
town,
quantifié,
in
celle
a
de loger
city
sa population.
where a
Donc,
vast
ces
majority
différents
of
types qui vont être des
national income
typologies
went
de
to
logements
Beijing.
appliquées à des typologies de
So what we're
bâtiments
seeing is
vont se
typologies
succéder à
of
l'intérieur
buildings.
de Chaoyang. Et nous avons, pour vous dire un peu à quoi ça correspond,
which show a
mais
terrific
des
shift
cuisines
from one phase to
collectives.
another
C'est
in
aussi
the
ce qui se passe
workers' estate in
dans les
Chaoyang.
quartiers populaires de la ville, dans ce qu'on appelle les quartiers de Lilong, qui ont été construits pendant la fin du 19e et le début du 20e. Et même si la photo est récente, je dis ça parce que ces appareils...
So what we see here is a shift from the Lilong built at the end of the 19th century.
Que l'espace
Although this photograph is quite recent,
conçu au départ assez généreux en termes de hauteur sous plafond,
the dimensions of the rooms are quite generous. The ceilings are quite high. Though this space, with the multiplication of a proliferation of families and family sizes, it was going to become much more restrictive. So in the 90s, the major change was in the status of housing. The initial status was that employers would allocate housing, the employer could be an administrative service or an industrial company. So there was a shift from housing that was allocated to workers for these structures to housing that people could buy. So you can imagine the changes that this brought about. And I'll talk about that a little later. What we're seeing is a huge burden. A burden, how can you house an excessively numerous population? In 1990, there was 4 square meters of space per person in Shanghai.
Le seul moyen qui est mis en œuvre et qui est trouvé, c'est de dire on va commercialiser le foncier. Et cette commercialisation du foncier va nous permettre de débloquer le financement nécessaire à la construction dans des partenariats publics-privés
so the only way to do this was to begin construction through public-private partnerships,
comme vous le voyez là,
in order to build tower blocks or housing for apartments like this, as you can see in the background, which would take over the whole of Shanghai, both on the suburbs and within the city itself, while maintaining the plot divisions, because that was one of the fundamental factors in Shanghai. So the famous plot structure mentioned by Philippe Paneret made it possible to maintain a certain quality, a certain atmosphere in Shanghai, which gives it a character that other Chinese cities do not have. So in order to make the pill, help people to swallow the pill,
jusque-là, c'est même pas le coût d'un paquet de cigarettes, et tout d'un coup, ça devient un bien. Alors, dans un premier temps, ça renacle.
To start off with, a dwelling had no value at all, and then all of a sudden it becomes a private asset. So in a situation of very strong economic growth, 20% in Shanghai,
il suffit de rien faire, juste de regarder l'argent se développer.
An asset, a real estate asset, is just something with which you need to do nothing. You can just let it grow in value. So the situation becomes very varied, very diversified, which means that people who took the opportunity or had the resources to buy the right to use their dwelling would either sublet it or would add rooms. In any case, work on it and convert it, either to earn money out of it,
Ce qui fait qu'on a toute une série d'initiatives qui vont se mettre en place,
or to establish more living space for their own families. So what we see is a comparison of early photos on the top there, and then the photos here with extensions in the bottom left. So we've seen that in Egypt or Lima or in Tashkent. We've seen the same kind of extensions with whole floors added, which in turn would result in a modification in use and modification in relation to law and regulation, and this increase in differences within the population living in Chaoyang. Why is that? So we're going to see some typical cases that are very different. Here you can see in 4 decades, generations increase. When you can't move the walls, you build mezzanines inside. So this apartment here has been raised on the roof. And then there are operations put in place by the Real Estate Management Office, which itself encourages these groupings of apartments that we've seen elsewhere. So here is one of the renovations that was developed in the 2000s and then the 2010s. So when possible, you manage to group, to cluster families and residents. So you can cluster 2 families where previously you had 3. So it's not when I say cluster, in fact it's separate. Or with a big family, or an important family, where in the past you had 3 rooms which shared a kitchen. So these variations in fact generate an environments that are very different and distinct. Different because here I'll show you some images when you walk around Shanghai. You can see this environment which was originally chosen for its quality, the fact there's a river, you can grow trees, the generous public spaces or common shared spaces. This generosity of public space is very pleasant. You've got the little river at the heart of Chaoyang, the trees have grown. The framework is almost idyllic, or would be if you didn't forget that this is where you live.
Et puis, on a des aménagements qui vont être réalisés en fonction des variations d'usage. Alors, les variations d'usage, on a évoqué, je reviens les habitants eux-mêmes, pouvoir gagner de l'espace sur des parties qui sont des parties communes et collectives. Et puis, il y a des aménagements qui sont aussi provoqués par les résidents eux-mêmes, de manière à pouvoir organiser des petits salons de thé, alors souvent avec du matériel de récup, ou aussi aménager cette fois au niveau des villes. On le reconnaît suivant si le mobilier est tendu ou pas. Tout ce qui relève des exercices pour le maintien du bien-être, qui sont en même temps des lieux où les jeunes comme les vieux viennent d'aborder des exercices de gym le matin et le soir. Des poireaux, des tomates, quel est le coût de l'huile et combien se vend le mètre carré actuellement. Et puis on a également, dans cette privatisation des espaces, là aussi l'organisation de commerce qui n'existait pas du tout à l'origine. On est dans cette ère nouvelle socialiste des années 50. Donc on n'avait absolument pas la possibilité d'avoir des commerces. Et là, on est juste à côté d'une des grilles d'entrée de cette cité ouvrière, grille d'entrée qui est devenue assez féroce. Voyez le détail, même avec une trottinette, on ne passe pas. Il ne faut pas non plus faire de trop grandes courses, aller au supermarché, parce que là, il faut passer à l'égyptienne.
You can't even do your shopping at the supermarket. You have to do a sort of dog leg to get through the entranceway.
Que vous voyez là, donc c'est un détail de cette entrée. Cette entrée qui a plusieurs vocations, effectivement,
so the purpose of this entrance is multiple. Partly to limit, make it difficult for thieves to get through.
Philippe Panrel évoquait à propos
Philippe
de
Panrel talked about earlier with Chengdu.
Extrêmement important
the prevalence of thieves
de la population des travailleurs qui vient à Shanghai.
Comes from the enormous number of people from the huge numbers of workers who come from outside Shanghai.
Eux dont on se méfie et dont on se protège,
they are the ones who are
parce que ce
the
sont
objects of
eux
distrust and protection,
sont vus comme
because they are
les
seen as
provocateurs des plus grandes dégradations de
the people who cause the greatest deteroration in the living environment.
Effectivement, des gens qui viennent pour quelques mois.
It's true that people who are just coming through for a short while, for a few months, they know because housing is cheaper. They come, so they take absolutely no interest in the environment. While for those who've been there for 4 generations, it represents the culmination of a career. They were the model workers. So what we see is a confrontation between two populations that have nothing to do with each other and distrust each other greatly. Some belonged to the elite of the nation in the past, and the others are there temporarily, and they don't give a damn if the sinks are blocked and if the dustbins are not emptied. They are there temporarily, and they are there regularly. They are often driven by new regulations. I was talking about shops. If they give onto the streets, well, since the last summer, there's a new decree, a decree which has to be implemented by the district authority to control legal commerce. Broadly, any commerce that doesn't have the evidence that it's legal is illegal. It's difficult to get such evidence. It might be a photo that shows that it's been there for a while, or it may be a paper. So all these ground floor commerces, it's hard for them to prove that they are legal because they were previously dwellings. So these incoming workers can work in different areas. They may be vegetable resellers. They may fix shoes. So the aim of cutting the possibility for people to have these small businesses is a way to get rid of them. So what we see is a change in uses.
une vision qui est très compliquée et très complexe de ces fameux comités de résidence.
So what we get from this is a very, very complex vision of the famous residence committees.
Dans les années 50,
in the 1950s, they were the ears and eyes of the party because they represented the Communist Party cell within the residential unit, and their job was to make sure that everything was going properly. In the event of a neighbour's quarrel, they were the ones summoned.
Eh bien, il a pour vocation toujours d'éviter les conflits de voisinage,
right.
mais
Well,
aussi
now
d'améliorer
today,
les conditions d'éducation.
the Residence Committee has the same role of dealing with problems between neighbours, but also to improve the living environment.
Ces conditions d'habitabilité qui manquaient. Et puis, Shanghai, toujours à la tête de ce qui peut se faire en Chine,
and Shanghai is always the pioneer in what can be done in China.
C'est du patrimoine.
So now what they're saying is that what was done in the 1950s has now become heritage, protected.
Il faut que nous en ayons une trace.
So we need to keep traces of it.
Il y a un des bâtiments, alors ça c'est Chen qui pourrait vous dire.
So Chen could tell you whether it was in estate number 1 or the city as a whole.
Déjà classé.
There is a part of this development which is now classified, listed as architectural heritage of Shanghai.
Depuis, il y a un petit musée qui est ouvert.
So since 2011, there's been a small museum that's been opened by the local authority.
Malheureusement, j'y étais un lundi la semaine dernière et le lundi s'est fermé, donc je peux pas vous dire.
I was only there last Monday, but unfortunately it's closed on Mondays. I can't tell you what it's like.
De l'appartement témoin de Perret du Havre.
But I guess it's a kind of
déjà tout était là, même les mobiliers, etc.
Model
et puis,
apartment.
C'est quand même toujours un lieu qui a une certaine valeur, puisque ces fameuses photos de mariage que l'on voit, qui sont un vrai business,
wedding photos that we see,
on s'affiche devant
which
des
are real business in all these in the town.
C'est un décor ou
Very
devant
often
des
you
châteaux.
see
Eh bien,
people getting married with a Ferrari hired for the purpose in front of the photograph.
Puisque là, vous le voyez derrière
So as you can see behind
de bonheur qui sont
the
affichés
symbols
dans ce petit portrait
of happiness
de cette portion de cité qui a été refaite.
displayed on a rebuilt bit of the estate.
Donc voilà, cette
And that's where married couples are photographed. So the future of the city of Chaoyang, as you can see, it's a vehicle of many complexities of use, of generational sprawl, and generations and peoples with very different views on the place where they live, and the views of the municipality and the government with their contradictions as well. So it's all these situations, paradoxical, and these tensions, which is the current situation of Chaoyang. For the future, we have to wait a little while. Thank you very much for listening. Hello, everybody. We are delighted to be here for this international colloquium. We propose that you look at this issue of the transformation of collective housing by the inhabitants through a district built in the Soviet era using the construction principles of the micro-district. This huge complex is called the Chilanzar collective. It's in But before getting into the subject, we'd like to thank everybody who helped to organize this colloquium, for supporting us in this communication. Let's go back to the introduction, the objectives of this paper, as well as the context of this research, which we began 7 years ago on the Chilanzar district, which has changed enormously since the fall of the Iron Curtain. Our objective in this communication, this paper, is to follow a double objective. First, to lay down the terms of an important debate on the micro-district, the elementary functional unit of the Soviet city, which profoundly marked the physiognomy both of the city of Tashkent and more specifically of the district we will be looking at this morning. Since the proclamation of Tashkent as the capital of the new independent state of Uzbekistan in this district has changed through densification, which is embodied, as you can see, in multiple what we might call informal buildings produced by the people living there. As we'll see from the experiences described in this colloquium, we'll have to see if there's anything specific about the Uzbek approach, which is something that's fascinated us since we started this. Is there anything specific about Uzbekistan culturally and architecturally? Second, this paper also consists in the examination of construction protocols, which, to use the terms employed in the paper, which leads to an urbanism without urbaness, an architecture and an urbanism without and a landscape without norms. So to tackle this double objective, we'll use the work we undertook in 2 semesters at the École de Versailles, École Architecture School of Versailles, at an international workshop with the Architecture School of Tashkent. And we were both interested in this approach, and we decided to make it the subject of our architectural degree. So we returned to Tashkent in 2011, and therefore we had to develop our own tools in order to work on this district, since access to the archives is very limited, as is access to land registers, which can be very easily found in France, but we were unable to access for this study. So the first exercise that we conducted was to redraw the aerial view in order to have a plan that could be used. So this first map was amended and completed through a photographic campaign and in situ surveys at different scales. So from the largest scale of the district right down to the scale of the housing unit. So it is this field work that gave us a close understanding of the district, and particularly the practices of the people. This was done in the through a tool that is excellent for making the comparison between designs produced by architects and the practice of inhabitants. So this combined survey of the district made it possible to produce a much more precise plan, as you can see here. So to study this transition between design space and the space produced and lived, experienced by inhabitants, means that you have to understand the first stages of the construction of the city of Tashkent. Obviously, we can't be comprehensive here, but we suggest certain interpretations of the morphology of Tashkent, which is very complex, which is characterized in its urbanization by the juxtaposition of clearly identifiable urban fragments. So let's go first to the city of Tashkent, where its location is in the east of the country, a few dozen kilometers from the Kazakhstan border. Tashkent and its conurbation, as you can see on this map, has been the arena of multiple forms of fragmentation of urban space, reflecting political changes over time. As Shane Delane explains in an article in 2015, the city can be read, can be interpreted through entire fragments in its historical periods. First, the city Caravanserai on the Silk Route. Uzbekistan was on the Silk Route. It then became the capital of the Russian Empire of Turkestan in 1865. Then Uzbekistan, a state created by the Bolsheviks in 1924. So this is the period we're going to talk about here, the latter period, the Bolshevik period, from 1924 to 1991. So this urban fragment, inherited from this complex history, can be seen by the juxtaposition of different fabrics. Some very dense fabrics, which you can see on the right-hand part of this aerial view, which corresponds to detached housing built in the Russian colonial period. And then just next to it, and right next to it, you have these huge collective housing blocks, which correspond to fabrics which are much looser. This fragmentary agriculture, this juxtaposition of objects with very varied styles, it gives Tashkent an architecture with multiple faces. Which is placed in districts of very, very different and diverse styles and periods. Here you can see a photograph, which is the image people have of this capital, with objects of great architectural quality, like this madrasa, inherited from the 16th century era. What's also characteristic in Tashkent is these districts which are called the Quartier de Malha, the districts of Malha, which are districts of low housing. And what's characteristic and what is striking in this landscape is these huge monumental objects built in the Soviet era. And you can see on the left the administrative center, which was built in the 60s. Which was published in a special issue published on Soviet architecture up to today. And equally interesting objects in terms of their monumentality in the period, with the Tashkent Opera, built in the same period. And then next to it, then these structuring objects in the urban landscape, we find these huge apartment, collective housing structures built using prefabricated construction methods. So a photograph of a quite ordinary facade. And then we have a tower block, which we found interesting in our two study visits. The Cosmonaut building, which bears witness, apart from this ordinary construction, to a real commitment by architects to renew the architectural language of collective housing, a sort of laboratory of ideas about habitat in that period. In order to present the district and its presentation, we'd like to take a step back in order to try to understand the space originally conceived by architects and urbanists. So what you can see here is two documents. They're quite rare documents, historic documents, one of the few which we could access, because these are documents that were published. So you have the project plan, where you can quickly see how it's built. So wide avenues, small blocks, within which you find amenities generally. And then on the side, next to it, a project model, a photograph, which shows the strictness imposed on the construction of the whole Chilanzar district. The idea which you can see with the amenities in the center of the small complexes is the idea of the micro-rayon, the micro-district, the strategic position of amenities within these small structures. The idea is to go back to the super blocks built in 1936 in Moscow, but the micro-rayon, the micro-district, is the smallest unit in the functional city sought by the Soviets. And this model would spread throughout the USSR in the second half of the 20th century. Those of you who've traveled in the ex-USSR country, ex-Soviet countries, you'll recognize this plan. The city is designed at 3 scales: the micro-district, the district, and then finally the municipality. So the idea is to start with a small micro-rayon, a micro-district, with amenities, which is designed to be an autonomous unit. The use of this generic and tested model, built on the whole of the Soviet territory until the 1980s, was to speed up the planning process in cities and to guarantee rapid production of several thousand housing units designed to provide housing needs for a fast-growing society. In the model, you can see maximum distances between dwelling and amenity, so it should be accessible on foot, and so that children going to school should not be affected by cars. So it's a distance about 500 meters. Here we can show the drawing, which shows the itinerary of children traveling around their micro-district, either to shops, to play areas, or to school. The dimensions of the new district were also designed to maintain a balance between housing and the different urban services in order to optimize the distance of daily travel. Most of the cultural and community services are placed at an average distance of 600 meters from the housing area. In other words, accessible on foot in less than 6 minutes. Each residential unit was equipped with leisure amenities like a cinema, theatre, or medical dispensaries no more than 1 kilometer from home, while larger amenities like hospitals, stadia, and administrative centres should be within a radius of 1 meter or 1.5 kilometers, i.e. 10 to 15 minutes on foot or 5 minutes by car. So the building site at Chilanzar was a medium scale compared with other developments, but was built over quite a long period, with the work beginning in 1959 and only beginning 10 years later, largely in 1969. So in this process of development of the district, one date is particularly striking, and that's 1966, where there was quite a significant earthquake took place and destroyed a number of houses, both in the historical center and also in Chilanzar, where in fact a number of buildings were destroyed, as you can see on the picture. And it would have quite a big impact on the design and typological changes relative to the district. So I'll explain what I mean by this. In the district initially, and according to the plan, the project plan, you only see one typology of buildings, which was envisaged, and only one form of construction method, which is 5 or 6 floor buildings made of brick in the traditional style. But after the earthquake, the new choice made for construction was prefabricated methods of construction, where you have fairly small units as well, with remaining with 4 or 5 floors, but using a method of construction that was faster and cheaper. So in terms of identifying this kind of typology, as you can see on this plan, I don't know if you can tell with the colors. What's important to identify is that all this part you can see on the eastern side corresponds to the first phase of brick buildings, 55 to 66. And after the earthquake, you can see that they were exploring the new construction methods, which are the yellow buildings on the map, on the drawing. So the prefabricated panels you can see here, they're quite powerful images. of the construction methods used. They were built either at the heart of blocks, and then on the urban edges they explored a system of larger blocks, and in particular higher blocks, which made it possible to structure the whole of the micro-district.
The
rigor we talked about, this typological rigor, strictness, which is obviously imposed by the economic and functional objectives, but nevertheless included a landscaping which is quite pleasant and attractive, with vegetation and semi-green areas covering almost 80% of the ground space, the ground area. These micro-districts are also structured by avenues of trees at the edges of the urban front to form a sort of green belt. The focus on squares and public areas for each for the construction blocks added to the pleasure of the human experience in living there. This pleasurable aspect of living, which you find in Chilanzar, had a key function by protecting people from the winter weather and also offering cool conditions in summer. So this is something that we found surprising on the ground. On this drawing, you can see dimensions that resemble the grid structure of the Mabala. So you can see the model is a rationalized model, a globalized model, but there is a tendency, particularly in the public spaces, to return to certain models which existed already in Tashkent and resemble the more traditional districts. And these garden courtyards also correspond to a profile, a standard profile. It's perhaps something we know is less known about the micro-district system. There are very clear topologies, buildings based on distance, but there's also a standard design compared to in relation to public space, and this is what we call a model composition, which involves a pedestrian route, family gardens, and then a central space dedicated to the whole community. So this knowledge of the initial model enables us to measure the changes and transformations that have gone on in the last 50 years, and to understand space as the inhabitants produce and experience it. As in many other public housing, collective housing areas, there were big changes in Chilanzar. There was a gradual, steady impoverishment of the population, sanitary problems, hygiene problems, combined with poor housing and acoustic conditions. So the failure of the Soviet cities model to correspond to the needs of Tashkent led to aspirations amongst the people for larger buildings, larger residences, and that encouraged a new architecture that tended to assert the role of the individual in society. So, with the original strict design of the master plan, we see adaptations made by people, which are a combination of appropriation, transformation, and extension. So as you can see, there are big, very major changes in the facades, given its intermediate situation between public and private sphere. So now what we're seeing is a real patchwork of social practices, which reflects a number of individual and collective actions from the ordinary changes to very inventive changes. So we can see appropriation, and now a total transformation of the facade, creation of private entries, either on the ground floor, which is probably the most common, or even on the upper floors. So you see staircases, and then a third degree, which is extensions, And here you see a real extension of the home, which is a general densification with the creation of additional rooms, which is something that's really quite remarkable, as you can see on the left. The extension of the loggia, the angle of the mass, or the extension of the apartment on the ground floor, which is perhaps the most common, most obvious type of extension, but which involves a privatization of what was initially a public space. So this range of variations can also be seen in the loggia, which is generally used in the typology of buildings and Chilanzar. Since the loggias have kept their initial appearance, there are a few loggia that have retained their open and maintained spaces. Many of them being closed in, or partially closed in or fully closed in to constitute additional rooms. So when we survey the changes to these spaces, we can see three types of transformation, where some choose to keep the loggia open and use it as an outdoor room. Others choose to close it in with very large windows, which make a sort of conservatory, what we call a conservatory, closed in winter, but with the possibility of opening it up in summer. And finally, the closed loggia, where the fronts have been closed in with bricks and the rooms narrowed in order to make an extension of the lounge or an additional room giving onto the outside. So here we see the changes on the facade. There's been no specific regulations on this. As you can see, there's a wide diversity of methods of closing in the facades, which is shown fairly clearly on this photo. And the big concern regarding these modifications is that the initial structure of the building is not really suitable for the changes, and some of these brick enclosures on the loggias can threaten the fabric of the initial concrete structure. So this wide range of changes has huge potential. As you can see on the outside spaces, there's a wide possibility of alternatives, people building their own vegetable gardens, building sheds or terraces. So this external space is the main method used by inhabitants to enrich their social lives and community lives. So we can also see So we're seeing a privatization of space designed to extend the domestic space through the appropriation, not to say the seizure, a seizure of part of the initially public space in order to incorporate it into the private domestic space. So from this observation, we can see that there's been a change of use, but also a modification of the status of space. So we wanted to work on this delimitation, this demarcation of space, these new boundaries introduced into the public space. So this is brought about by various forms of barrier, here fences or brick walls or concrete walls, or sometimes less firmly through strings and cables. In addition, there is a slightly different treatment of materials, where people are using concrete, people are using rocks, people are using pebbles to delimit space. And here the final transformation we identified, differentiation in terms of use. This is the question of parking, which was one of the big issues in the project, initial project, because initially the parking spaces were supposed to be left on the outside of the district, while today, as you can see, with increase in automobile fleets, people are introducing vehicles into what used to be set aside as green spaces, and producing a conflict of uses between cars, pedestrians, and residences. So what we see is ordinary processes of adaptation with an evolution in the status and perceptions of the inhabitants of Tashkent.
Témoigne également des qualités intrinsèques du projet initial en matière de paysage.
So what we see here is a sort of
à sa mutation.
Product of the initial conditions of the design of the
depuis 1991, la recherche d'une écriture
district combined with modern desires and needs. So to conclude, what we've seen since the Soviet era is an attempt by people to ignore the initial plans set up by collectivist organizations and the gradual shift towards a more private and desire-led adaptation of the environment. So now we can see how people
où les urbanistes et les architectes sont parvenus à définir le cadre d'un nouveau mode d'urbanisation.
Where people, urbanists and architects have managed to design
les architectes et urbanistes du quartier ont par ailleurs su profiter
produce a new kind of district, and architects and urbanists have managed to develop a landscape plan.
Édifié en périphérie d'anciennes républiques soviétiques, Chilanzar marque une étape
and now Chilanzar represents an important stage in defining a new conception of urbanism and housing, illustrated by the large scale of tall apartment blocks, carefully designed to promote the development of a high-quality collective life, community life, based on the urban concept of the micro-rayon or micro-district. So today this micro-rayon seems to play a considerable role based on its initial designs. When we see the changes that have been brought about by the inhabitants, we can also see the limits of such a design. Standardized construction not suitable for climate, housing units too small, excessively public nature of the public spaces, outdoor spaces. So what we're seeing is a phenomenon of densification appropriation. What we see in this is the inventive nature of people in their transformation of their living environment. So in order to tackle these changes, the municipality of Tashkent has, in the last 5 years or so, has been developing small projects to restructure these districts. While Chilanzar is not yet targeted by this phenomenon, we have to hope that this effort to control and uniformize the district will not threaten the initiatives and the creativity of the great people who live there now.